something that is absolutely amazing in just how terrible it looks, and I really don't know what to expect going into this. And before I get too far, I want to say that this was purchased outright on Amazon using funds actually from our affiliate links. So this is a video that you guys helped sponsor. And every so often I see something that just sets off my senses of this is complete crap. And what this is a MKing Digital UHS-2 250 meg per second, 1 terabyte SD card. Now, there's a couple of reasons this particular card, oh, I can just pop it open here, looked too good to be true. Number one, and I'll bring it up here. I wish I had one of their full-size SDs if I got some micros for them. Number one, this imagery, this design, this style is 100% pro grade, not MKing. And it wasn't just that MKing made a card that looks like pro grades. And I've seen that before. There's only so many ways to make SD cards look different. It's not common or not uncommon to see some of the not cheaper brands make it look like it's a SanDisk card, or some of the Kingston cards they'll clone the general appearance of, but it'll be pretty obvious that it's still their card. It has enough resemblance to catch your eye, but isn't necessarily a direct copy. They don't want to get themselves in any legal trouble. This looked like, in the listing, they took ProGrade's picture and just slapped their name on top of it. Okay, so obviously whoever this is, not necessarily interested in establishing brand identity. But the other part that really jumped out at me is that this card was $30. A 1 terabyte card right now should cost you anywhere from, I'm going to say 90 on some of the really cheap ones, to like $150 or $200 or higher. Especially if you get a really good one from someone like ProGrade, you're going to spend a pretty penny on that 1 terabyte SD card. So this is at minimum a third the cost it should be. So that's strike, I don't know, 2. Strike 3 is that although this came up on my first page of Amazon results, there's 0 reviews, even though it's been up for like 6 months. So we've got stolen imagery in what looks like somebody like scanned in and then printed a label from a ProGrade card to fit this. And they didn't get the label to fit properly on the card. It's not quite lined up right. This isn't a UHS-2 card at all, even though that's what this package says. This says UHS-2. I'm missing a row of pins. So minimum, this could only be, or say maximum, this could only be UHS-1 class card. Which you could hit V60 still, and you can hit 60 megs a second in UHS-1, but you're never going to hit 250 megs a second. So this card is just lying to me outright about its speed capabilities, even on the packaging. The price, like I said, the price isn't right. The imagery is stolen. There's no reviews, positive or negative, for this card. So I bought one. Because why not? Like, this is not a scam that I want someone to fall for. And what better way for me to do that than buying it? And I'm going to hook it up in my P1. I'm not going to get the whole test bench out for one fake SD card. And we're going to do 2 things. We're going to benchmark it. And maybe, just maybe, I'll hit some reasonable speed numbers. And then I'm going to try and put a terabyte of data on it. Because there's 2 different common ways to fake something like this. And you see it on flash drives fairly regularly as well, especially when you're ordering them from less than reputable sources. Number one is it's just going to be nowhere near as fast as it claimed to be. And that's actually the good way for it to be fake, because at least then it's slow, but it all works. The other option is that you get a card like this, or a flash drive that says it's some ridiculous capacity for the price, and And the reality is that it's a cheaper, smaller memory device in there, and you don't actually get a terabyte. You get, I don't know, 16 or 64 gigs, enough that if you start taking pictures on this thing in your camera, it's not going to fill up right away, but it's going to stop storing the data. And I've seen that done a couple of different ways. It just starts throwing out the oldest stuff, or maybe it doesn't actually record any of the newer images. Either way, you're not getting the space you think you paid for, and it's losing your data. So we're going to find out. Maybe it's just slow. Maybe it's not really a terabyte. Maybe both. Either way, you don't want to buy this thing. So let's get something out and throw it in. And for consistency's sake, instead of using the laptop's built-in reader, we're going to use one of these Kingston UHS-2 readers that we have. So just give me one moment here to grab one of those. Alright, and we're back. So I've got my Kingston UHS-2 reader. I'm actually using a Thunderbolt cable and Thunderbolt port, so this should have the full USB 10 gigs available to it. Oh wait, these aren't actually 10 gig, but either way. Full UHS-2 reader, plug our card in, and the first thing that I'm going to do is just go to my device manager and see that it didn't even pop up. Let's rescan disk management. Okay, 1,000 gig FAT32 partition. Well, let's go ahead and the first thing I have to do is just reformat it as exFAT, because at no point would I use FAT32 for something that big. And here's drive G, which what does it identify itself as? Generic mass storage class USB device. Okay. Couple of different red flags there while the benchmark's running. Number one is it identifies itself as 1,000 gigs on the nose. No 1 terabyte flash device is going to show up as a full 1,000 gigs. No 1 terabyte storage device is going to show up as 1,000 gigs on the nose. They're going to show up as 931 or 952 or something that tells me that it's been, it's actually 1024 megabytes of flash, and then we're seeing a binary to decimal conversion here that translates to roughly 1 terabyte of storage. And this is not good, because even if this was a normal, cheap SDHC card and 32 gigs of storage that you can get for next to net for free, basically, these days, I should have seen something show up in Crystal Disk Info, and it's still preparing, which means it's still creating the test file. This is not encouraged. Wow, 16 megs a second read. I bet writes are going to be just as abysmal. Okay, I'm going to stop Crystal Disk Mark now because it's at random write pass 2 and it is registering zeros. So we're going to just stop that. God, 20 megs a second, and I bet it doesn't even sustain that if I try. So what we've learned here, and I wonder if I can read the marks on the bottom. Yeah, there we go. Is that every piece of information on the bottom of this card, except for one, really, is a lie. This is not a V60 card. Not only could it never maintain 60 megs a second, I'm not even getting that in a short test like Crystal Disk Mark. Because normally I would run this and I'd see, 70 or 80 megs on a V60 card at minimum. And then I'd run something like IO meter to make sure that if I record for 10 or 15 minutes, it doesn't dip below that to actually meet that spec. This doesn't even get close. It's not a U3 card. That would require 30 megs a second, and I'm not getting that for reads or write. It's not a UHS2 card. There just aren't enough pins. It does technically meet the speed requirement for class 10, which is a whopping 10 megs a second. That's the only piece of information on this card that isn't an outright lie. And honestly, I think that's just because they can't get anything slower or cheaper. So next up is the capacity. It says 1,000 gigabytes. That's what it claims. And so to test that, well, we're just going to start by taking, how big's this? 30 gigs. We're just going to take my Steam library here, which is about 400 gigs, 388 gigabytes. We're going to start just by copying it over. I expect one of two things to happen. Number one, I expect to see my write speeds just plummet to nothing. And maybe they won't, but we're going to record this anyway, and we're going to let it run, well, at least long enough for me to go get dinner. And number two is it's either going to stop adding new data at a certain point, and I'll find out what that is. It's probably somewhere small. Could be only 16 gigs of flash, could be 64 gigs of flash. Whatever it is, it's not a full terabyte. Number two, it could just throw up an error. It could write to this for an hour at 10 megs a second and then throw up an error at 64 gigs. Or the card could just silently start throwing data away. Either way, I'm going to let this run for a while, and then I'm going to come back and, well, actually, let me do two things. Number one, there's that. Number two, we're going to right-click on this and hit Properties, so Windows will continue to attempt to keep track of the size. So I think if I make that the active window, nope, it's not going to keep active details on that. So I'll just have to check it when I come back. We're going to let it write as much data as it can. And we'll be back to check on it. And then, fortunately, this train wreck of a card was prime shipping. So I'm going to be able to get my money back. But obviously, the story here, the moral of the story here is that if it looks too good to be true, unlike the SATA drive reader that we got lucky with, in this case it is. Welcome back. It is the next morning. Unfortunately, I'm recording this on my P1. Since I had to move to the office, I didn't have time to finish this in the studio before leaving. And we can see I've copied what looks like 447 gigabytes of data. And if I go in here and I right-click on these and I hit Properties, it's going to count up the size versus the size on disk. And what? There's only 60 gigs of data. So what's happened is this SD card is actually roughly 64 gigabytes in size. But it has thrown away anything above 64 gigabytes of data. And if I just bring this up on Amazon, where we're recording, you can see, number one, it doesn't quite look like the card that I got. The printing is nowhere near as vibrant as shown in the picture. This is 100% Photoshop. And number two, we paid $25.99 for a 1 terabyte card. Now, the thing is, a $30 SD card wouldn't have been overpriced if any of the labeling was honest. I mean, it would have been slow, and I would have told you not to buy this particular card. But if it just reported its actual capacity, I'd say, you know what? It's expensive, and it sucks, so don't buy it, but it's still a fully functional card. Problem is, it lies. And on top of that, it is overpriced for what it actually is, which is a slow 64 gig SDXC card. Actually, yeah, it is SDXC, so that mark is at least accurate still. But I can buy a SanDisk Extreme Pro for 18 bucks. This is what a 1 terabyte card should have cost, 250 bucks. This is more than I want to spend. 64 is 1079, 1399, a 2-pack for 15 bucks from Micro Center. I'm beating a dead horse at this point. The card isn't the capacity it says it was, it isn't the speed it says it was, and it's 100% a ripoff of someone else's labeling and a good company's labeling. I'm just going to wrap this up as much as I can because it's just a pile of shit and say, don't buy the obviously too good to be true MKing card. In fact, there's a couple of other MKing cards I found when I was doing a little bit of digging, and they're all fake. MKing's thing seems to be fake cards. And no one's even bothered to review it, and I don't know if that means that people are catching on or if they cleaned out a bunch of fake reviews. I mean, this thing's been on the market for 4 or 5 months at this point, and there's nothing. You'd think at 25 bucks, someone else would have bought it by now and said, hey, this is crap, or that there would have been bot posts that say, this is great. Anyway, I'm getting off track. There'll be a couple of links to SD card brands that I would actually buy and trust to use. And ProGrade's one of them, and I'll separate them out into a couple of different categories because there's a difference between the Kingston Canvas Go card, which is great for a drone or like a Nintendo Switch, or that ProGrade 256 that I want to throw in a Canon 5D or a different professional level camera, just in price and expected results. So anyway, I want to thank anyone who helps support Pocketables using our Amazon affiliate links or by supporting us on Patreons. It is support like that 100% made a video like this possible. I'd like to thank Alextrix for providing our opening and closing themes. And finally, thank you for watching.